Did you guys talk about that?
We did. We haven't run it, but
Good morning. I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee for Thursday, August 1st. My name is Jeremy Schrader, and I'm the chair of the committee. With me at the dais are Councilmember Ellison, Council President Bender, Councilmember Reich, Councilmember Goodman, and Councilmember Gordon. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. We have 5 items on the agenda today, including a quasi-judicial hearing, but we'll first dispense with the consent agenda. Item number 2 is the approval of 2 alley vacations submitted by North Bay Companies for the project at 620 9th Street Southeast. Is there any discussion on this item? Not seeing any. I move to approve this item. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. We'll next move on to the quasi-judicial hearing portion of the agenda. Item number 1 is a consideration of an appeal by several decisions of the Planning Commission to allow a mixed-use building with 146 dwelling units and a ground floor office for approximately 600 square feet for the properties located at 2542 through 2554 Blaisdell Avenue, as well as 110 26th Street West. And we'll begin with the staff presentation. Good
morning, committee members. The project before you is at 26 in Blaisdell. It's made up of 3 parcels. The parcels are at 2542 and 2554 Blaisdell and 110 West 26th Street. On July 8th, the Planning Commission approved applications to allow a new 6-story building with 147 dwelling units at this location. And then an appeal was filed on July 17th by Thomas Tulane, who is here as the appellant regarding the Planning Commission's approvals. This is the site. It's located at the northwest corner of 26 and Blaisdell. So since the application went forward to the Planning Commission, the applicant has submitted a revised plan. So I'm going to walk you through some of those changes. The applicant had initially proposed a 6-story building with 146 dwelling units and an office space on the first floor. The plans have been revised, so 1 story has been eliminated. It's now a 5-story building with 124 dwelling units. And I'll walk through the land use applications that were initially proposed and that are still required. The ground floor is still proposed to have walk-up units and the small office space that's proposed to be used by the neighborhood organization. So before you, you'll see a table, and I believe you have a memo that should have been distributed to you with the changes that are now proposed. So there is a rezoning required on the site. The site currently has split zoning. 1 parcel is zoned OR2 and 2 of the parcels are zoned R5. With the initial submittals, that was the one application staff did recommend approval of to allow the site to be under 1 zoning district, which would allow redevelopment. Because there wouldn't be redevelopment couldn't happen on a parcel with both OR2 and R5 zoning. There's a conditional use permit, which is still required for a 5-story building, but 1 story has been eliminated. The FAR variance has been eliminated. The revised plans show a FAR of less than 3.0. The impervious surface variance has been eliminated with the revised plans. The lot coverage variance has been, it's still required, although the percentage of lot coverage has been reduced from 82% to 77.7%. There are no changes to the loading variance or the variances required along the front yards along 26 and Blaisdell. However, the rear yard variance has been eliminated for the building and is only required for the balcony encroachment along the alley. And then obviously site plan review has been still required, although the number of dwelling units has decreased. So here's some photos of the existing site. The site is just over 30,000 square feet in size and contains 2 small commercial buildings, a small surface parking lot, and a 2.5-story duplex. So this is a context rendering that was submitted for the original plan. So this is the plan that went forward to Planning Commission and that was approved there. And then you'll see that the rendering has changed now with the elimination of the 6-story, and the fifth floor is set back slightly, so it does change the both the height and the massing of the building. And here is the original proposal in rendering form and the revised proposal with 5 stories And I'm going to walk through a couple more. So this is the original proposal, a 5-story, original 6 stories from view from the west, and then the 5-story building. And so this is the original site plan submitted. So you can see that the rear yard is close to the alley here, and the revised site plan does eliminate that rear yard variance just for the building and brings in the footprint of the building a bit. This is the first floor of the building, which has remained largely unchanged, although there have been some changes to the parking structure, and then all the amenity space kind of shifted over slightly. So as far as comprehensive plan guidance goes, the site under the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth is urban neighborhood. Urban neighborhood areas call for density of 8 to 20 dwelling units per acre. The original proposal had a dwelling units per acre of 209. It's slightly reduced now, but it's still significantly more than what we would typically see in an urban neighborhood area that's not along any land use features. While the site is, it's located a block away from Nicollet, it is outside of the activity center at 26 and Nicollet. Nicollet is a commercial corridor, however, that is located a block away, and the site is a ways out of the activity center. The other guidance for the site under 2040 is that the parcel is indicated for Interior 3. And Interior 3 districts are intended to have 1 to 3 story buildings. And this is a designation in the 2040 plan that does not allow for a request to increase the height, at least as it's currently proposed in the plan. So staff at Planning Commission had recommended denial of all applications except for the rezoning to allow for this entire site to be brought under one zoning district. And with the proposed changes, though they have eliminated 2 variances and reduced the intensity of some of the other variances, staff does not write a new staff report for that, and the staff recommendation remains the same with the comprehensive plan guidance for the site not changing and the proposal not changing significantly. So I will stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Councilmember Gordon?
So has staff reviewed the new, I know you have reviewed it. Do you have a recommendation in terms of approving or not approving the 5-story version? I mean, there were a lot of denials over the 6-story version, and that was really clear in the staff report, but I'm not quite sure about if the staff has recommendations on the 5-story.
Yeah, if this building were to come in as kind of a new proposal, I think we would be in the same situation with staff recommending denial, just based on, the underlying zoning districts of OR2 and R5 have a maximum height of 4 stories, and with the upcoming comprehensive plan guidance being for even lesser height, that is the biggest concern from a staff perspective.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, thank you very much. At this point, I'll open the hearing, and I'll first give the appellant the opportunity to speak to the committee. Would the appellant or the representative like to come up and speak? And if you can say your name and address for the record.
I'm going to try. Good morning. Tom DeVinck, D-E-V-I-N-C-K-E. I'm the attorney for Mr. Tullian, who's here this morning as well, and I believe he wants to address the committee. We join with the staff. This is a fine project. It's just not in the right spot. And I don't think it's a close call when we look at the city code, the issues that would be required to be addressed to issue a conditional use permit of this kind, to put the extra story on there. I mean, look, we're realistic. We appreciate that the developer came down from 6 stories to 5 stories, but it's a little bit like my kid trying to stay up later every night, 9, no, 8:30, no, 8. This should be a 4-story build. That is the maximum. If we look forward to 2040, this area would be a 1, a 2, maybe a 3, right? 3 would be the maximum, and we're not close to that. We're looking at 5. Now, to be fair, of course, we're not under 2040 yet, so we're mindful that they're entitled to build to 4 stories if they meet other requirements. But if you take a step back at the big picture, of course, when this developer bought this parcel, they were buying a parcel that could be built to 4. That's how things are priced in the market. And what do they come in with? Well, how about we just go to 6? And, just between everyone here in this room, I almost think the developer was probably surprised when they got the approvals for all 8 or 9 of their requests at the commission level. It was a very close vote. I think it was like 5-4. But when I read the staff report, I was very surprised to see that vote come out 5-4 in favor of every single request. And I won't belabor the 8 points raised on appeal by my client, other than to say in a general sense, this project really doesn't fit. It's too dense for this neighborhood, and that's what the code, the comp plan, and the zoning all tell us. And therefore, we would side with staff on this. I really do like the change, by the way, on the alley side. I think that's underrated, of underrated importance, maybe, as we look at all the other issues, but it does change the feel and the character and the intensity and density of the project. So it gives it that more of a residential, an urban residential feel, which is what's appropriate. But to end up close to 200 individuals residing there per acre is not in conformity with the neighborhood and with the plan. And so on that basis, we would ask that the project be rejected as presently proposed, and that the Planning Commission findings be not followed but overruled. On a procedural matter, of course, this particular plan hasn't gone through the Planning Commission, and I don't know procedurally if the committee is looking at how to handle the new plan or not. But in terms of the decisions that have been made by the Planning Commission, Mr. Tullian, my client, would respectfully ask that those be vacated by this committee. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to address those, but I also know that Mr. Tullian is here.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Tullian, if you want to come up.
Hi, I'm Tom Tullian. My address is 2543 and 45 Pillsbury Avenue. I'm directly west of the development, the second house up from the alley. So, one of the houses along there, the 4 homes that are most directly impacted, I think. Tom DeVink and the city planning staff, I think, have made the case against the proposal. And I think we reiterated that opposition in the appeal. We don't find that the resubmission and the size reduction in any way fundamentally changes our position in the matter. I've lived in Whittier for the past 30 years, and I've seen the neighborhood go through a number of dramatic changes, especially from the late 80s, 90s, when the neighborhood was a fairly rough neighborhood to live in. I mean, it's inevitable that the neighborhood's going to change. We don't oppose development in the neighborhood, me nor the neighbors who are supporting this appeal. We don't stand in the way of development there. In this case, the developer has the right to propose a development that is consistent with the existing zoning ordinances and the comprehensive plan. We don't intend to stop that from happening if that were to become the proposal. But what we are arguing against is that what is currently being proposed is simply not appropriate to the particular site.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this point, I want to next see if the applicant wanted to address the committee.
Good morning, Rob Lubenow with Yellow Tree. Erin with DGR will go through in depth some of the variances, some of the revisions, how we got to where we are today. But I want to take a step back, maybe answer some of the questions that they had about kind of our approach to the building, the development site, and then also kind of getting feedback from the stakeholders, neighbors, even planning commission and staff. Starting in late April, early May, is when we started to look at the site. So we were approached by the current owners of the property who have their business there for redevelopment. We've been interested. We've been developing around this area and within Whittier, and we thought this site was very unique. So it is at essentially the epicenter of Whittier. So being 26th and Nicollet, and then kind of on a one-way on 26 being the thoroughfare, so connecting to Lindale, connecting to Hennepin, and so on. Meeting with the neighborhood group, it was apparent that they had a vision not only for this site, but their neighborhood as a whole. And I think, it's always been our approach to work with the community, understand, what are the things that they value. It's different for every neighborhood and a lot of your awards too. But understanding the values, and then how can our building strengthen those values, and what can we do with inside of our developments to provide an opportunity for a neighborhood and things that they want, and where they see their neighborhood going. It was pretty apparent, and maybe lumping those into two items is probably community involvement and attainable rents. So the first one, I like our approach. I think it's something new, unique, something that isn't common in any neighborhoods, is them truly wanting to have our building with a community space, something that connects not only our residents, but bring in a renter base, and how do you get them to be a part of the neighborhood. So our approach is to have a true public-private space, a space that is open to the neighborhood, that we can use as both a tenant for a bike lounge, but it will be opened up to the community. So by doing that, allows another means for organizations to have a venue within our building, and then potentially our tenants also being part of that community. In addition to that, it'll be an outpost for Whittier to manage that process, manage the use of the space, but also the renter rebate program that we're going to implement in our building. So we're an entry point market rate builder. We're doing everything we can to provide spaces to incomes between mid 30s and 60,000. It's the largest rental pool that there is, and there's very few people building to it. So there's people that have get highly subsidized products and build affordable housing, and then everything else is high-end luxury market. So this project, if it was open today, although we don't have income restrictions, we have units affordable to 60% AMI. Most of the building would be affordable to 70% AMI. And all but 2 stacks of the building would be affordable to 80% AMI. So that's difficult to do, but I think it also rings true about the housing stock and the availability of a housing option that Whittier wants in their neighborhood, and our approach to do that. Second is just kind of the process of going through the formal approvals, working with both the Planning Commission and planning staff. At our initial COW meeting, there was a mixed review on the building, but I would say the majority did not have a strong comment or feedback on the 6 stories. They did have some concern about bulk and height and where it's properly located, being more towards Blaisdell. But it wasn't a strong consensus that what are we doing here? It's something that, is just outside of the activity center, and something that, a few blocks north, they have 6 stories, they have 5 stories on Blaisdell, 6 stories kitty corner to us. It's not truly out of place, but how do you properly design, taking into considerations of the neighbors, and then ultimately the neighbors moving to the west, who's here today. Planning staff, I would say, was similar. We always knew that there was concerns about impervious surface and lot coverage, but we had some alternate compliance how to do that. Green roofs, ways that we can kind of adjust our building to accomplish those concerns. It wasn't until a week before our planning commission that we received formal notice that the project would be supported by staff, kind of not allowing us to react to some of those requests and concerns that they had. So that's where we're at today. That's our recommendation, responding both to staff, the planning commission, Whittier, and then obviously the neighbors directly to the west of us. It's how we revise our building, getting rid of multiple variances. The only initial need for the alley variance was for parking, and that was not a want of Whittier, but more of the neighbors. That sole first story parking was to provide more parking. I don't think we need that, and we're able to get rid of that variance. But it's also looking at, the main thing for us was get under that bulk that's allowed for OR2. So we're under the floor area that's provided, but now how do we situate it that it's not impactful? So while we're further away from the neighbors to the south, we also took some of that mass, as you can see, from the alley side and then placed it on 28th. I'm sorry, on Blaisdell and 26th. So again, it's looking at kind of site-specific issues, and then also the variances that we still have, I think are definitely supported. With that, I'll turn it over to Erin.
Sure. Question from Councilmember Goodman?
I'm just wondering, I had a couple of questions. With regard to the community space, is
Yes.
the neighborhood association space, are you charging them rent for that?
We are charging below market rate and roughly what they're paying now for a space that's smaller and without the joint space. And I'm not sure if they have parking. So I'm
You
not
don't
sure
have
on
to
that
ask.
part, but
I'm also wondering about this renter rebate thing.
Yes.
So I kind of, I have to tell you, and maybe I'm the only one who's going to kind of point this out, but it feels a little uncomfortable to me, almost like a bribe. Like, well, we'll give you space in the building at below market rate rent, and we'll give our renters money back to give to the neighborhood association, and now the neighborhood association is supporting it. And I don't know that that kind of dealing overrules what the zoning and planning documents point to.
yeah.
So
Right.
can you speak to that? Because it
Well-
feels uncomfortable to me, and I've never seen this before. I mean, it's one thing to work with the neighborhood association. It's another thing to give the neighbors money to give to the neighborhood association as well as to give them below market space. It doesn't feel right, and I just want to have you talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Great. A couple points of clarification. I do see those separate. I see the involvement of the neighborhood and what we're proposing. I still strongly feel without that involvement, this project is something that is proper. How it's set back and where it's situated, the dense, the bulk. Regardless,
Well,
there's...
it's not consistent with the plan, the zoning currently, or the other zoning. So it's not consistent.
Right.
The
So
law
that's
would prove that.
Yep.
So I want you to focus on these issues that come across as a way to win over the neighborhood association. Try to explain that a little better, because maybe I don't understand that correctly.
So our standpoint is exactly that. How do you do that? How do you have a public-private partnership, and how do you not lose out on all the opportunities of people building in the city and say that we can't work with anyone, we can't come up with unique, innovative ideas to solve a problem just because we're a private organization and they have their they're public and they have different needs. So how do we combine those two? It is transparency. It's seeing on, what is provided, how is it provided, and why. But they're good things that can come out of that relationship. So, is it a bribe or asking? We have other developments in their neighborhood that are consistent with what we want to do here. But it's just the opportunities that this have being at the epicenter of Whittier, that we're immediately across from the farmers market. There's an opportunity for us to open our doors in this public-private space.
You don't have to, Mr. Chair, I'm not interested in why they want to do this here. I want to know about this kickback to the neighborhood association.
I would suggest, so in the interest of time, we have representatives from the neighborhood association and as well as others that could talk more to this. If that would be acceptable, and I know they're under a little more of a time constraint, so I think if you would concede some
that's
time.
fair. But it's not a kickback. So they get
I would actually, why don't we hear from them and you can answer? No, actually, if we could have a representative from the neighborhood come up and talk a little bit more about that. And we'll go back to the applicant. I think this might bring across some of your points a little bit better.
Hi, my name is Kaylee Brown. I'm the Executive Director for Whittier Alliance Neighborhood Association. We are located at 10 East 25th Street. I'm also a Whittier resident at 2630 Pleasant Avenue. So speaking today on behalf of Whittier to kind of echo the position that the Neighborhood Association took on the original proposal voiced at Planning Commission, and to respond to your concerns as well, which I know some other neighbors from our Housing Committee are here to do as well. So an extensive community engagement process was conducted by our Housing Issues Committee volunteers to kind of broaden neighborhood input on this project. And while we weren't able to reach everyone nearby, our support of the project was crafted in large part based on the responses that we did receive. We conducted a survey, distributed it electronically and also to adjacent blocks through door knocking. We received 83 responses. We also held 2 public meetings where the developer presented, including a vote from the committee. We had multiple small group meetings where volunteers met to discuss the project. The top community benefit asks coming out of that process and expressed in the survey were support for affordable housing at 73%, improved environmental features in the building at 53%, and community or public use amenities at 35%. More than half of those surveyed, at 59%, lived within 3 blocks of the site. So ultimately, the developers made several changes in response to community feedback and also agreed to partner with Whittier Alliance on 3 key community benefit elements to better integrate this project and its residents into the existing neighborhood. The first, as Rob mentioned, would be to establish a program where tenants can pay for a portion of their rent by volunteering in the community. The program will be designed in partnership with Whittier Alliance to manage the volunteer signups with multiple nonprofits in Whittier, not just our organization. This gives us something that we can do now on rent levels than when we have so few other tools. The second would be to create a joint use public space on the 26th Street side as a community resource rather than just a tenant amenity. That is space that we would not be paying rent for, but we would be able to facilitate access for the community in. It would include bike repair stations, have a portion of days protected for tenant-only use, but also specific days and times where it would be available by the community for things like youth bike repair clinics, community workshops, pop-up markets for local entrepreneurs, and more. Thirdly, the proposed ground floor office space in the building would be rented by Whittier Alliance, which would allow our staff to effectively manage the adjacent community space schedule and to ensure implementation of the volunteer rebate program. 36% of residents had expressed concerns about the height, and the revised proposal further responds to those concerns, which we appreciate. So we ask that you recognize the level of engagement done, recognize the value of those negotiated community benefits, and ultimately join the Planning Commission in improving this project.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, or might go back to the applicant? Thanks for jumping in line.
Yep, you bet.
I think we'll have a public hearing a little bit after that. I will say during Planning Commission, it was a very long presentation by the applicant. I would try and tighten it up a little bit, maybe really focus on some of the questions that have been raised. You know, why this building would make sense, even though they made a very convincing case that our current ordinances or current zoning for it does not support. Council President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to share, this is in my ward, and I've had the chance to talk with a lot of the stakeholders. I am trying to hold some of my questions because I know there are folks who are here to speak who need to leave, and I know Councilmember Ellison is also potentially needing to leave. So I do have a lot of questions and comments about this project, but I'm trying to let the public hearing happen so that we can hear the information from all the folks who came to speak today.
Well, in light of that, I would like to give the applicant the opportunity to kind of concede time, maybe come back later after hearing from more of the public, because I know that there's folks on both sides that might be helping your case. So, I mean, you're welcome to take more time now. I guess the deal is more time now or less time later, but you may lose folks in the room. Is that, if I'm hearing that correct?
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, I just wanted to state that I got an email this morning from a constituent who wanted to speak today, and I don't know who it is or what their position is on this project. I just want to make sure that if there are folks in the public who want to speak who need to leave, that maybe we could just offer them a chance to speak now. And if I'm wrong, that's okay. Maybe that person wasn't able to come today. So that's all. Is there anyone who needs to leave that wants to speak? Okay. So maybe that'd be fine. Maybe that took care of itself. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so does somebody want to go up? And
Are people just being Minnesota nice, or are we actually okay now? Okay.
So I wanted to sort of more, sorry, my name is Stephanie Brown. I live at 26th and 3rd. I'm a member of Calvary Church, which is across the street from this site.
Thank you.
And I'm the elected chair of the Housing Issues Committee. So to specifically address your questions, Councilwoman, we were also concerned about conflict of interest and the perception of conflict of interest, and so very explicitly made sure that both the rental credit and the community space were not tied to a relationship with the neighborhood organization. So in order to make it function, the management burden of that is with the neighborhood organization, but the volunteer could be anywhere in any nonprofit in the community that is willing to sign off on hours, and the space could be accessed by any member of the community. They would just have to request it. So the intent was to make it truly public community access and not linked to something that directly benefited the Whittier Alliance. I also wanted to speak to some of the issues that were brought up in the appeal, and then as time allows, we have other people who wanted to speak more generally. But the appeal itself states that what the project does is it maximizes economic return with providing no unique benefits of any kind to the community. I fundamentally disagree with and challenge that statement. We have gone to great lengths to make sure there is benefit to the community, and that benefit is not just less neighbors, but it's something that really gives back to the community and allows a way to integrate existing and new residents. They also challenge that it is out of context and away from the major activity center. I would say it is 1 block off of the major activity center. It is a half block off the 2040 zoning change. The city staff recommended approval. The Planning Commission approved a project on 1st and 27th Street, so also 1 block of Nicollet, just earlier this year at 5 stories, that even required a variance for parking, so it didn't even exceed parking the way this one does. And it really offered 0 unique benefits to the community. It just wasn't an ugly building. It was only 1 story above, and that was handily approved. There's a building 2 blocks off Nicollet that's 5th stories, the Chroma building at also 26th and Stevens, that was approved. And so the idea that 26th Street is not a corridor of any kind, and that this is a strictly residential or low-density residential when there are apartment buildings on the northeast corner, on the southeast corner, and adjacent to the church on the southwest corner of the building, feels disingenuous to me when we look at the overall context of the neighborhood. So we can speak more to the community benefits now or later, but I wanted to specifically address both that question and the appellant concerns. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any other members of the public that need to leave? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back to the applicant. Okay, thanks.
All right. Erin Johnson with DJR Architecture, 4053 Bryant Avenue South. Thank you for being here today. I'll be as quick as I can be with respect to time. I would believe the planner did a good job at summarizing the changes on this application. I would just like the chance to run you through how we got to where we are and why it was important that we actually change the application for today's date, because even though it was passed in the Planning Commission, there are concerns. There was an appeal. We felt there was a need to respond, and I'm just going to walk you quickly through those changes. So the first change was that we reduced the height to 5 stories or 61.5 feet, and we know that we're asking for a CUP. The allowable height is 4 stories or 56 feet, so what we're really asking for is 5.5 feet above that allowable height. This did a number of things where in the CPC hearing, the CUP for height was a 5-4 vote. It was very close, which told us there was great concern over it. The other vote that was very close, which was a 5-3 vote, was the FAR variance. So by eliminating this floor, we reduced a variance for the FAR, which determines the bulk of the building, where we believed it was important that we address the concern that the the proposal was out of scale with the neighborhood. We brought it into scale from a FAR standpoint with no variance. Other than that, in terms of votes at the CPC, the other variances were passed 7-1 and were not close. So we believed when we did this change, we're directly responding to the need, even though that the application did pass at the time. The second change was we pushed in the rear portion and eliminated the setback in the rear of the building facing the alley. And this was important because when we talk about the scale of the building fitting the neighborhood, we have to be very careful about how much impervious surface we add to the neighborhood. And previously in our other application, we were asking for an impervious surface variance. Part of the reason we were asking for that is because in order to scale this building to the neighborhood, we've added walk-up units on the ground floor. But to get to these ground floor units, we have to add impervious surface to get access, to get ADA access to these units, which is why we were asking for impervious surface variance before. Now that we've reduced this footprint of the building, we've eliminated completely this impervious surface variance and brought it in within code, which is another measure that we're addressing the concern of the size and scale of this building. And so the last change we did, just out of when we change things naturally change around on the ground floor. We have shifted some uses of the bike lounge and some of these amenities towards the corner, because what we were trying to do was to preserve the walk-up unit on the southwest corner and keep that relationship of residential transitioning into the neighborhood. With that, I just wanted to clarify the reasons for those changes, and we believe they're in direct response to concerns that were at the CPC, even though it was passed. And to address Councilman Goodman's question before, from my perspective as a designer, this relationship with the neighborhood, I think did concern everybody, did concern me as a designer. However, as a designer, I never had a problem with it, because the kind of ideas we're talking about, the kind of things that we're planning to do for the community and activities all seemed like the right step for that community. When we were laying this out, this applicant was not just checking the box, meeting with the neighborhood. They went above and beyond to have multiple meetings with the neighborhood, get through things, and come up with a solution that the neighborhood could be proud of, that they had a direct hand in. They had influence into their neighborhood, which is the whole purpose that me being a citizen of Minneapolis, has a reason to be involved in a neighborhood group. And likewise, in the new 2040 plan, I believe it's policy 100 that kind of ensures that we just passed, that we are protecting by our new comp plan the neighborhood's right to have influence in their own neighborhood. With that, that's my perspective on that issue. Thank you, and I'll answer any questions if you need further clarification.
Great, thank you. Not seeing any questions. At this point, I'm going to open the hearing to other members of the public who would like to speak. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes, and that which will be tracked by the timer near the clerk. And would any of the members of the public like to speak? Come on up, and if you could say your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Stuart Stevens. I live at 2535 Pillsbury Avenue. I guess there isn't a whole lot more that I can really say that Mr. DeVink and Tom Tulin have already said and what's in the appeal. But basically, I'm here to support the position of the appeal, even with the changes that have been suggested. I think it's still the density, just the overall impact on the neighborhood is more than what should be allowed. As Tom said, we're not against development. We just want to make sure that people play by the standards that have been set in place. And the other thing I was wanted to touch on is that as far as community involvement goes, it should be noted that none of the homeowners along 26th Street or Pillsbury Avenue had been contacted about this project. So we had no input on the process at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public like to speak?
Hi, my name is Nicole Tyler. I am a Whittier resident at 2420 First Avenue South, and I'm a member of the Whittier Alliance Housing Issues Committee. So I am here to speak in support of project approval as long as it's with the stipulations laid out in your packet from the Whittier Alliance. I understand a lot of folks have come up here talking about the creative partnership, so I'm not going to focus too much on that, though I think that it is a very impressive body of work, the way that this has gone back and forth with the neighborhood and the developer. But I just want to touch on what I see as the unique benefits to the community. As a renter, as a resident, I really appreciate the ways that renters were considered in this because we are very engaged in Whittier. I think this could be a very incorrect statistic, but I think we're 80% of the neighborhood, more than 80% of the neighborhood. So all that being considered, I want to touch a little bit on the volunteer rebate program. So I think that rebate is the wrong word. I think credit is sort of what we should be looking at there because the return is coming to the community and it's not getting kicked back to the Alliance. I worked for St. Stevens Human Services for many years, which is in the Whittier community, and spaces like that could really benefit from people in the community getting to know folks who are sort of coming in and out of those systems. And not only that, but it provides a way for rental residents to really invest in their community and like set some long-term roots and feel like they are invested and engaged and valued in a way that we often just look at homeowners to do. The potential for this pilot program also kind of allows for units to be affordable at less than 60% AMI, only through this sort of creative partnership, and that would be without any subsidy. The jointly used community space is also a really big benefit to residents, and especially to people who sit on committees like I do. I realize I'm running out of time. But also having the Whittier Alliance have a little bit more of an office space that is centrally located at that epicenter might give other residents an opportunity to get more involved with our neighborhood association.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you, council people. My name is Shannon Dodson. I'm a Whittier resident at 2432 Clinton Avenue South and a member of the Whittier Housing Issues Committee engaged in the project for support. Development in our city and our neighborhood is not going away, and we need more housing for a growing population and the folks already living there. The Whittier Alliance Housing Committee understands that we need to think more creatively for ways to identify to secure broader community benefit in new developments, even if we can't get everything we want. We can't wait for the city to establish new tools, so we've been trying to create our own to the best of our ability. Proposed rent on the project are higher than Whittier averages, but they're not as high as others that we've seen in the last year. And we hear and understand the concerns of the city staff and residents about the scale of the building, but given the overall sentiment of the neighborhood, if a larger scale building is what enables these types of creative solutions, we believe that this is a reasonable trade. The developer has further reduced the building height as a new proposal, and we believe this is good and a reasonable compromise. We aren't supporting this building because of the height or the number of units, but because of the community benefits we have negotiated into the project. And that, I think, could set precedent for other developers coming into our neighborhood. I think that this is a new concept for the builders to think, to make our community more vibrant by, engaging people to volunteer and to create a community. To reduce the size would be to remove the community benefits from the project, and a smaller building with higher rents and less community partnership does not feel like a better deal for our neighborhood. We ask for you to respect the effort that we've went to evaluating these trade-offs and the community and the response to the input involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members wishing to speak?
Good morning. Bruce Goldstein. I'm the owner of the property involved here and also run a Goldstein Law. And I'm really here with my developer hat on more than the legal hat, but sometimes we wear several. And I think it's important that all of you understand why we're doing this. First of all, the three parcels, one is a house that is literally falling apart. We're doing what we can right now to keep it put together with Band-Aids. The old chiropractor's building on 26th hasn't been remodeled or done, really had any improvements for over 30 years. It's completely outdated and really needs to be torn down. My law office was built in the early 90s, actually, as an ad agency. We've done significant modification of that to try to make it work for a law firm. It really doesn't work so well because of the way it was put together. And frankly, we were moments away from signing a lease and moving within the area when we heard that at the last moment that staff had really changed their position and was not recommending the proposal before the Planning Commission. So I've had to put those plans on hold. I eat at Eat Street, on Eat Street just about every day, usually at the Bad Waitress on 26th and Nicollet. I usually sit at the counter, and I speak with, I like being with young people, and I speak with them all the time about where they live and what they're doing. And really, we have a lot of students in the neighborhood. We have a lot of kind of early young professionals, and then we just have a lot of early young workers that need affordable, nice housing in the area. I hear that all the time, and I see. Could I have another 2 minutes?
No, that's not how it works. Thanks so much. Anyone else wishing to speak? All right, not seeing anyone. I'm going to close the public hearing. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know there were some more questions from council members, so I don't want to bypass that, but I will make a motion to deny the appeal for number 1 and to approve the rezoning on number 3, and I'm happy to speak to it or give council members more time to ask questions. And I do have a couple of questions myself.
All right. Looks like we don't have any other questions, so if you'd like to go ahead. So
just on some of the details, I do want to state that I had a lot of the same questions that Councilmember Goodman voiced, and it wasn't my intention to cut that off or those were really important questions, and I think both myself and my office and staff have made it very clear that the city can't really be involved in the enforcement of any private agreements between nonprofit organizations or private entities. And so just want to state that very clearly here publicly on the record. I also, just speaking, because there's so much testimony about the community benefits, I do want to state that, first of all, I really appreciate how much effort went into outreach to the community and the door knocking and the volunteer hours that went in. It's what we say we want neighborhood organizations to do. And I appreciate that you listened and that you took the time to do all of that. I also want to say that the results of the survey and the door knocking, while not everyone was reached, and of course there is a difference of opinion from the folks who live right there who are very affected by this building and will be, whether it's 4 stories or 5. They seem like the things that I hear as well from constituents. So for example, affordability being the number one priority, that is what we hear all the time. And it's why I'm the author of our inclusionary zoning ordinance, which unfortunately has taken a very large number of years, which will finally be coming before the council later this year. So in the absence of city policy that responded to my constituents' concerns about affordability, they did their best to negotiate for what they could do in their own community. My entire ward is located within a quarter-mile walking distance from high-frequency transit. So it is a bit of an arbitrary boundary about where we say something is transit-oriented. My entire ward is transit-oriented. So sometimes it's a matter of what are the adjacent land uses and what's the context for any particular building. All of the other things that we heard from the community are also things I frequently hear from constituents. So the lack of community meeting space. There are 2 churches in Whittier that are like the only place to meet for community meetings, and those have constraints related to the schedule and when the buildings are open and closed, and they do come often with a cost, a financial cost to the community. I've also used those spaces myself, and they're really supportive and wonderful assets, and they've been really generous with their space, but there isn't really a community space in the neighborhood. So I'm not surprised to hear that came out as a priority. The bicycle facilities, this is adjacent to the 26th Street Protected Bikeway and the Blaisdell Protected Bikeway. I do want to ask the development team to respond to the condition that was put on the project about working with staff on bicycle facilities as the site is redeveloped. I'm hopeful that the team will be really mindful of the 2 protected bikeways that are envisioned there, the one that is on 26th today and the one on Blaisdell that is envisioned in the future. So just to say, I hear a lot of concern about this particular negotiation, and I think as council members, we have to take that maybe under advisement, but that isn't how we're able to make the land use decisions that are in front of us. But I did want to reassure my colleagues that after talking with everyone and hearing how this arrived the way it did, it is very reflective of what I hear from my constituents day in and day out, and the priorities are clear. This is also just a couple of blocks from Whittier Elementary School, which was actually built with neighborhood involvement, neighborhood funding, and has this amazing Bikes for Kids program. It's adjacent to a park, and so the parent involvement staff person there who also runs park programs in the summertime does all these things with kids biking to and from school and in the summertime. So again, very tied into things that are already happening in the community and are right physically nearby. This location, which is right off of Eat Street. So all that said, I haven't lobbied my colleagues. I've talked to them to see if they had any questions. I know council members may land differently on this project, but at this time, knowing what I do about the physical size of the building and how it has been changed, I am supportive. But I do want to see if the developer can talk specifically about the bicycle facilities and their conversations with Public Works.
So we have had a meeting with Right Away to talk about the condition on approval about the bike lane and potential improvements. The conversation to date that happened last week revolved more around right now the temporary bike protection plan for when we would be doing construction. And that's where it's been left because Right Away suggested that further talks have to happen, including traffic, because they realize they're not the only stakeholders, but Right Away were the ones that did put this comment on the PDR report when we went through the PDR process. So that's where it sits today, and we'd be continuing that conversation about how best to do that, because this is, I think everybody can agree, Blaisdell is a very critical street to Whittier, and it has to be handled however we alter it very delicately. So,
and I do want to make sure we're connecting you with the staff who are planning the future bicycle facility for Blaisdell Avenue to make sure that it's all aligned. And
yeah,
so great.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
So I just want some clarity on what we're approving, because obviously it's not the list of things on the agenda here, because it's no longer it's no longer 6 stories or 73.5 feet. I mean, I know we're denying the appeal, and then I'm not quite sure.
I would like to correct, we haven't denied the appeal, we still have votes to do on that,
Right.
but
Right.
that, I think some clarity would be helpful.
Right, the motion, it would be to deny the appeal, and then what would then be approved, because what we had before us was a 6-story building. So I don't know if somebody can clarify that for me, and then
Right,
what
so-
are the
Get a little clarity from staff.
Yes, so I believe there's a memo in your packets that kind of goes through the changes and what applications are now required versus what was required when it went to Planning Commission. But it's probably best to go through them one by one, just so we're being clear with the action. So the approval for the conditional use permit had originally been a request to 6 stories or 73.5 feet. That would be an amended request to 5 stories per the memo in your packet. The floor area ratio variance could be returned or assumed withdrawn by the applicant based on the revised plans. You can help me out here, Lindsay. The impervious surface variance could also be returned or considered withdrawn by the applicant. There's going to be a modification to the action for the maximum lot coverage variance because that has been reduced. The loading stays as does the front yard setbacks. And then the final modification would be an adjustment to the request for the rear yard setback would now be just for the balconies on the rear yard, not for the building wall itself.
There was both a memo and I think a table that should have been included, which lays out all the applications that were in the staff report, and then whether they are still needed or not, and the changes that would be required. But similar to what Kimberly just walked you through.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification and the fact that we went through them again out loud after the motion was made. I think from 56 to 61 isn't that big of a stretch. I'm trying to get my head around whether or not to support the motion here, so I wanted that clarity. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing others, I'll add my own comments. I was one of the dissenting votes at Planning Commission, mainly because there's just so many variances, and then it didn't, bless you, it didn't make, the zoning just didn't support the building there. I really appreciate the developer looking at the height and hearing that loud and clear. I really, as I said at Planning Commission, really appreciate the work that's been done with the neighborhood organization. I would love to set the precedent today that, you know, by working with the neighborhood organization, by going above and beyond what Minneapolis says, we will allow something, but I can't do it with this project. I will not be supporting the vote. I think that while we've set a very ambitious goal with the 2040 plan, some of that is being transparent, some of that is being clear and sticking to it. And while it is, while we will have areas that are across the street from each other, that's kind of the issue of drawing those lines. And for the city and for all of its residents, being clear is, I think, very important. So while I encourage other developers to kind of learn from this and work with neighborhoods to feel what will fit in and do something that will really add to the neighborhood. I think that when you're applying some of that would have been just to get to 4 stories and on this lot, and here we're looking at 6 and now down to 5. Councilmember Gordon, is that back up again? Okay. Council President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think, I appreciate the reference to the Minneapolis 2040 plan. And as you know better than anyone as chair, staff is hard at work looking at how to implement that plan after it is adopted by the Metropolitan Council. I do think of all of the land use or the development intensity classifications that were created and adopted, the interior 3 is the one that needs the most detailed development and understanding of how that will be implemented. Interior 1 is very clear. Interior 2 is a very slight differentiation from interior 1. And then interior 3 is the these traditional neighborhoods that many of us have in our wards that are today mixed. They have 4-story buildings, they have older buildings, they have lots of new buildings. And so I say that not to reduce confidence in the vision or the direction of Minneapolis 2040, but to just state that you and I have been talking a lot with staff about how do we develop a design-oriented approach to missing middle housing in these neighborhoods that are really mixed today. And so I expect that to be a years-long conversation, and many of us have been involved in it for years past. So just want to highlight that I don't expect the interior 3 land use or the built form areas to be clear-cut until we have the time to really do that approach to understanding how missing middle housing can be codified into our new zoning code in the future, or updated, not new. Mr. Wittenberg, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
Well, I just feel an obligation to follow the current rules as we're dealing with height, which does allow a height increase with a conditional use permit rather than the future rules. So I'm noting that now as, in fact, it seems like we're obligated to operate under the current rules and restrictions, but I really appreciate us looking ahead to the future and all the commitments we just made as well. So it's an interesting discussion.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Clerk, would you mind calling the roll?
Sure. I also, Mr. Chair, want to just clarify. Originally, Council President Bender had made a motion to, to deny the appeal on number 1 with the appropriate revisions, but also the approval of number 3, which is the rezoning. Right. I think it's probably a good idea to separate those votes. Okay.
Absolutely. I just want to be clear so we didn't forget about that one. And,
yeah.
But
I'm never going to forget.
Do we need to then amend the motion on item 1 to be explicit about the changes that staff, or does the staff feel comfortable with direction to use that chart? Seems wise to.
Based on my understanding, I would assume that we are, with the 9 appeals on the agenda, that we are basically considering number 2 and number 3 withdrawn by the applicant, and then we would be approving 1 through 9, or denying the appeal with the appropriate revisions based on staff's recommendations.
As reflected in the chart in the memo.
Correct. Yep.
I just want to be clear so we don't have any confusion or thanks. Perfect.
Councilmember Bender.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
No.
Gordon. Aye. Reich.
Aye.
Chair Schrader.
No.
There are 4 ayes and 2 nays.
Thank you very much. Next, why don't we go on to number 3 for the rezoning? To just follow up on the second part of your motion. So Council President Bender has moved item 3, the rezoning application. Discussed during this hearing. I'm going to, all those in favor of the rezoning, please say aye. 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 All those opposed? No. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. Item number 4 is a regulation of the drive-through facilities ordinance. This was postponed from our June 27th meeting, and we'll begin with a brief staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair Schrader. This is a zoning code text amendment related to the regulation of drive-through facilities. At its meeting of June 3rd, the City Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval of the ordinance in front of you, and they did so on their consent agenda. The amendment would prohibit the establishment of new drive-through facilities in all zoning districts. Currently, drive-throughs are allowed in only 6 of our 23 primary zoning districts. The proposed amendment also would clarify, add some additional clarity to what we consider to be a drive-through facility or not. There are some new models of ordering things before you get to a store, and those items being brought out to your vehicle. Target and other facilities are doing that. We are not considering that a drive-through. We are making that clear in our definition, among other clarifying points. The issues that have led to the amendment primarily are concerns about vehicle idling and noise being from both the vehicles themselves and speaker boxes, as well as the curb cuts that conflict with our pedestrian goals. Typically, any new use with a drive-through facility is going to need a curb cut in and a curb cut out in order to accommodate circulation needs. So we are often concerned about the conflicts that are created with new drive-through facilities along our corridors. When this issue was first added to our work plan, it came up after a string of fairly contentious drive-through facilities were proposed. Generally, residents have been not very excited about new drive-through facilities in close proximity to their homes, their residences. But we didn't have a lot of good tools in dealing with those concerns. It's very difficult to address things like noise and idling that are kind of inherent with drive-through facilities. We have heard one concern from the disabilities community. I, along with Council President Bender's staff, have met with the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on People with Disabilities. We've met with representatives several times, as well as the full committee once. Ultimately, we were not able to reach an agreement that would be responsive to their concerns. I understand that a letter from the committee was distributed today. I have not seen that letter, so I can't speak to the specific contents of it. It's important to note that existing drive-through facilities would all be allowed to remain as legal non-conforming uses, and those property owners who have existing drive-through facilities would be able to ask for permission to alter them, expand them, or even reconstruct them. Again, this ordinance was approved by the Planning Commission on its consent agenda. There was nobody present to speak in opposition at the ordinance at the public hearing. Minneapolis 2040 is even more explicit than our current rules about our current policy, about prohibiting drive-throughs. But we feel like the ordinance in front of you is quite supportable under current policy. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Well, thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
Yeah, I had a question about maybe about the definition of drive-throughs. I was thinking about this, and it occurred to me that some of the libraries have book drop-offs. In fact, the downtown library has one that's deep within their parking ramp, so it's contained in the building, and there's one curb cut to get in and out. The East Lake Library actually has one on the driveway into their parking lot. Are those considered drive-throughs?
Councilmember Gordon, that's a good question. I would say we have not considered those to be drive-throughs. Drive-throughs have typically been interpreted as you're transacting some sort of business while not leaving your vehicle. We have, in somewhat a similar situation, have determined and I think clarified in ordinance that things like dropping off household donations at a store that resells them, if you're not leaving your vehicle, that's not really transacting business and is not considered a drive-through, even though arguably there are some similar impacts. We try to make a distinction there between transacting business and going about those kinds of activities.
I did see the letter from the Committee with People with Disabilities, and I think it's worth reviewing, and it talks a lot about sort of, you alluded to some pull in and pick up, you order first and those kinds of things. And I think there are even some instances maybe where a retailer now will have a parking space reserved for somebody who's called ahead of time, and they may even bring it out to them. I'm not quite sure how it works. But they're emphasizing that if we're losing the drive-throughs, we should maybe somehow create incentives or requirements for other options to be available for some needs. I know they also called out ATM machines as a particular need, so something to look at. I don't have amendments or ideas at this point, but it's worth giving that a read and for us all, I think, to reflect on it. They raised some good points. It was kind of the letter, it was coming at the last minute, though, which made it hard to deal with, too.
And Councilmember Gordon, those are good points. Of course, businesses will continue to have to comply with the Minnesota Accessibility Code as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act. When we talked about whether the city should take on some responsibility related to informing businesses of their responsibilities to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, there was some concern about that potentially leading us to taking on an enforcement role. Technically, the city is not in the role of enforcing ADA. That's actually the federal government, the Department of Justice, that enforces that. So we were a little concerned about kind of blurring some of those lines, but clearly businesses will still have to comply with the law on both Minnesota Accessibility Code and ADA. And many businesses do go beyond and provide accommodations to people who if a walk has not been sufficiently shoveled, for example, and they're in their vehicle, businesses will often bring goods and services out to a waiting vehicle if they make a phone call.
And we don't have to get lost too far down on this, but maybe it's even things like when we're approving surface parking lots for a business, we can somehow look, or do they have some short-term stalls that could accommodate this, or the right-of-way by businesses when they're functioning? Do we have options for that? Like I guess disability parking is something people usually ask for, but anyway, something to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For discussion purposes, I'm going to move approval and speak to this, and I'm sure Council President Bender also probably has something to say. This originally came up as a body of work as a result of a business wanting to build a one-story building with a drive-through on South Hennepin Avenue, which I just was as offended about as most of my constituents who live in that area. And that's where this work really started. There is no doubt that in my long tenure on the council, one of the more controversial things that comes before us is neighbors opposing drive-throughs. I rarely have seen anyone other than the applicants of drive-throughs come to speak in favor of them. And I think that this threads the needle really well, because essentially what it says is anyone who's there now can stay. That increases the value of those properties and pretty much ensures that where there is a Walgreens in the future, it might be a CVS or vice versa, because they have the special privilege to be able to have a drive-through. So we should note that we're actually increasing the property values of the businesses that have them currently, and I think that's fair. It's not unlike the tobacco work that we're doing with regard to the spacing ordinance. But in the end, having multiple curb cuts in downtown or in commercial corridors makes absolutely no sense. It is nonsensical for people who walk or bike to be thinking about having to go across large driveways and multiple large driveways in multiple sites. There are a lot of things the city is doing to ensure accessibility to people of all abilities. I'll just note that PV Plaza was a $10 million investment in making sure that that plaza owned by the city was accessible to everybody. The city takes ADA extremely seriously. There is nothing about this that changes anything that's happening currently. The city is, for the most part, a built environment. There are not green fields for us to develop where new curb cuts could be installed. So this is a question of having plenty of drive-throughs for banks, fast food, and pharmacies. I support all of those. I drive more than most. I'm not a big biker, so it sounds odd coming from someone like me, but my constituents have told me, especially the ones living closest to commercial corridors, that drive-throughs are a gigantic problem as it pertains to the number of curb cuts and the safety of the interaction between pedestrians and bikers, which is why I partnered with Councilmember Bender to bring this forward. I'm really proud of this work. I think it's something that should happen in a city like this. And I don't think it's hurtful as it pertains to an ADA point of view, because we're not taking anything away that is currently there. And in fact, we're kind of investing in the ones that are there by making those properties more valuable.
Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wittenberg, I wondered if you have the map that shows where drive-throughs are allowed today. It is in our, on LIMS, it's available as the attachments, but you have it. That's perfect. I think it is. Thank you. So thank you, Councilmember Goodman, for making the motion. And I'll just echo that this Walgreens, that we were able to work together and to respond to our shared constituents' concerns, primarily in Ward 7, of course, right, adjacent to the new building. We had to negotiate all these different things. That door that we got on the corner, it's always closed. I'm always calling staff to say, the pedestrian access door says it's broken all the time. I don't think it really is. But I do think it's important to note that, the largest areas here that are highlighted are a lot of industrial areas, but the places where drive-throughs are really allowed today are, kind of smattering of sites on some of our commercial corridors. So And a lot of council members over the years have put pedestrian overlay districts onto corridors to disallow uses that are more suburban and car oriented in style. So this is not a huge dramatic departure from our past. Is actually just kind of an incremental move toward what the city has been doing for many years. We had discussed a lot of different ways to respond to the disability committee's concerns, and partly looking at this pattern in this map, it became difficult to imagine how we would maintain this pattern in the future as our zoning code evolves. And we had talked about other different versions of should we allow drive-throughs only in mixed-use buildings, and I think council members are open to that. I will say that on the Kmart site, there at Lake and Nicollet, of the many iterations of conversations I've had about that site, one was trying to get a nearby a pharmacy in a mixed-use building, and it seems like that is a very difficult development to make work. And so we've seen a couple of examples, but I think that is a relatively limited application. So we've brought this ordinance forward as proposed by staff, as approved by the Planning Commission, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that my colleagues might have.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll echo the comments of my colleagues that have already been made. This is clearly sort of a refinement of the direction we've had for probably over a decade. This is not a dramatic overhaul by any means. To Councilmember Goodman's points, the accommodation that we have existing is pretty much well spread in every community. I don't know one community that is not served by a drive-through pharmacy, and the things that we do value and that would serve disabled communities. So I think we're not doing anything too dramatic here, but we are reinforcing our existing policies and our pending policies. And just on the note of the industrial, where it's the preponderance of areas where you could do it, because outside of that, it's a very, very, very narrow set of areas where you could do it. This is exactly the kind of land use you don't want to have there. It's the opposite of what that land use is for, which is a high concentration, ideally a high concentration of employment at the highest possible wages versus the lowest use of the land with the lowest wages. It's quite the opposite. And that's the one large area where it's allowed now. And so eliminating that, I would say, in addition to the well-put comments of my colleagues, it reinforces that policy as well. And I wholeheartedly endorse that.
Not seeing any other questions. Councilmember Goodman's motion is before us. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. And now we're going on to our last item on the agenda, which is the zoning code text amendment work plan, and I'll invite staff to give a presentation.
Thank you, Chair Schrader. This is the zoning code text amendment work plan that we're bringing for your consideration this morning. We most recently brought a work plan for your consideration last November. The work plan currently has 15 items. It consists of both previously guided items on the work plan from last November that have not yet been completed, as well as some new amendments that are both technical in nature and amendments that will implement the policy direction from Minneapolis 2040. After the council confirms our work plan, new amendments that come up generally will go to the bottom of the list unless there's some legal urgency or other special circumstance that means that an amendment has to get done relatively quickly. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the work plan generally or any specific items on it.
All right, are there any questions from my colleagues? If not, I'm going to move the approval of the work plan. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Thank you very much. And with that, we have seeing no further business before the committee. We are adjourned.